What is up, NFL fans, and welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I am Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach KT Smith, and a quick call to action for any of you that might be watching this on YouTube, the Fans First Sports Network YouTube channel. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel so that you get all of our content, whether it's live stream shows or these pre-programmed shows like the NFL Whip Around and Pez's Picks. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, follow, subscribe so you don't miss anything coming at you on the FFSN NFL feed. With that being said, you heard the bell. Kevin Smith, Coach, what's going on?
Nothing. I got to silence my phone there. You heard that thing. You heard that ding right there. So nothing. Summertime. I was in your neck of the woods over the weekend. It was 97 degrees down there in Maryland. So
where were you in Maryland?
We were in Columbia for a big lacrosse tournament. So it was hot. I got to say that.
It was hot. How did you fare in the lacrosse tournament?
We got smoked. By some very, very big programs from all over. We played teams from Florida, Illinois, Virginia. It was a pretty interesting tournament. Some very talented young kids out there.
Maryland knows how to do lacrosse. I'll tell you that.
Sure did, man.
All right, let's talk about the NFL because that's what everyone's tuning in to hear, and it's all about this weird lull. So we're just going to pick and choose some spots here. We're going to talk about some things as we pertain to training camp starting up in about a month, which is crazy to think. Like when we're recording this, the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team we both root for, they're 1 month away from reporting to training camp in July on July 24th. But let's start off with last year's crop of players. I sometimes think that once the draft happens every single year, everyone's obsessed with the new shiny toy, and they forget about the toy from last year. And sometimes it's the second-year players that can make or break a team's success. In this case, it's a sophomore jump, or is it a sophomore slump? And so what I wanted to do was to go back and look at some of the big names. You helped provide some of these names that we're going to talk about, 6 players in particular. And we're going to say, like, what do you think are the expectations going into this year? Who of these 6 players do you think will make a huge jump? And is there anyone that'll fall into that sophomore slump category? So first and foremost, Coach, let's go over the 6 players. Bryce Young, number 1 overall draft pick, Carolina Panthers quarterback. We've talked about him on the show prior. Anthony Richardson, quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, injured last year, didn't play much. Bijan Robinson, a lot of people thought he was underutilized in Arthur Smith's scheme in Atlanta. Then you have C.J. Stroud. What a successful rookie season down with Houston. Will Anderson also in Houston, and also we'll throw in Jordan Addison, wide receiver now with the Minnesota Vikings. Coach, out of those 6 players, who could you see making a huge sophomore jump in 2024?
So you had uneven seasons for some of those guys. Right?
Bryce
Young's year was widely regarded as disappointing, not all his fault, bad situation in Carolina, but disappointing nonetheless. Anthony Richardson kind of an incomplete because he gets injured. I mean, Will Anderson and C.J. Stroud wind up winning offensive and defensive rookie of the year respectively. So you're kind of all over the spectrum here. I think I'll give you 2 names of guys I think are in position for a really good sophomore year. I think Jordan Addison's in great position up there in Minnesota because you've got Justin Jefferson re-signed. You've got TJ Hawkinson. They've got some weapons there. You know, the addition of Aaron Jones, the running back, I think is a great addition for their scheme and their offense. Now you lose Kirk Cousins, so maybe the passing game falls off a little bit. But Addison could be a guy, because of all those other weapons, who draws a lot of single coverage and who sort of becomes a little bit of the forgotten man from a defensive perspective. You're going to have a ton of attention on Jefferson and Hawkinson. Could open up a lot of opportunities for him. He had a good rookie year, and he could certainly build on that. I'm very interested to see what happens with Bryce Young, because I think Bryce Young was in a really bad situation last year from a talent-wise, from a coaching perspective. But Carolina has brought in Dave Canales as their head coach. And if you look at his resume, the last 2 stops that he's been in, he was in Seattle, when they rejuvenated Geno Smith's career. Mm-hmm. And then he went to Tampa Bay and helped rejuvenate Baker Mayfield's career. I mean, he's been around 2 quarterbacks who were thought to be disappointing, and has been as both the passing game coordinator in Seattle and the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay, one of the key figures in resurrecting them. So if there's a guy who bodes well for Bryce Young, it's Dave Canales. So I think that he's got a chance to really bounce back in his sophomore year.
It's good that you said those 2 names because I'm going with 2 different names. I'm going to go with Anthony Richardson. He was dynamic when he was healthy last year, and he gets hurt. So really, is there any way to have a worse season than what he had last year? Unless he stays healthy and absolutely sucks. That's the only way that I think you would have a sophomore slump after his rookie season. If he stays healthy, I think that Anthony Richardson, at least from just a mobility standpoint, is going to be dynamic enough to have people thinking, okay, this guy is at a huge step in the right direction, or what we thought we were going to get last year. So it's kind of a rookie season for him again, 2.0, we'll call it. So I've got Anthony Richardson. I also think Bijan Robinson. I talked about Arthur Smith's scheme. He did not accentuate Bijan Robinson by any stretch of any metric, really. I think that he has a year under his belt. They're going to be able to utilize him down in Atlanta with that new offensive scheme. Raheem Morris, the new head coach. I think he's a very dynamic player. I think he's set up for a big jump this year. Now, let's go to the other side of things. Who's going to have a sophomore slump? Who's going to be a guy that does not live up to the hype or maybe takes a step backwards?
Weirdly, it could be CJ Stroud because
I was going to say.
Because the expectations are going to be so high. Yeah. I mean, people are going to expect him to be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, and he may wind up being one. But to ask him to be that this coming season could be tough, especially now that opposing DCs have an entire year of film to study him. In a way, he snuck up on people a little bit. I mean, he was very, very good coming out of college. Don't get me wrong, but I think that there were some things that they did down there with the new coaching staff in Houston. Nobody had really any film on these guys, with either the staff or the quarterback. And now you got a year to study him. And man, you know, the NFL those coaches are phenomenal at adjusting and taking away what you do well. So he still might play really good football this year. But I just think the expectation level is so high that it's going to be really hard to meet it.
That you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to go with CJ Stroud again. I think he's still going to be good, but the Texans as a team snuck up on everyone this year. No one saw them making the playoffs, winning a playoff game, and making as much noise as they did. I'm going to go with another player that I think is going to be, again, difficult to go backwards from what you saw last year, but I am not a believer in Bryce Young. I just don't think he has it. I think that I thought he was a reach to be the number 1 overall draft pick a year ago. I think that he's undersized for the position. I don't think they have the offensive line to protect him at this time. And I think he's going to struggle again in year 2. And unfortunately for the Carolina Panthers, who have invested so much into him and so much capital, I don't think that it's going to pan out the way that they hope, at least not now, at least not this year. So I'll go with Bryce Young for the sophomore slump. Now, we didn't mention Will Anderson. What's your take on him this upcoming season?
I think he's a phenomenal player whose skill set really will allow him to be successful both in Houston's scheme. And you think about what adjustments can you make to limit the effectiveness of a quarterback? Well, there are a lot of them. I mean, there's lots of coverages and blitzes and things that you can mess around with. And you look at he's doing this thing well. So we can find 3 or 4 ways to try to attack that thing and limit its effectiveness. How much can you do to limit the effectiveness of a really good edge rusher? There's not a lot. You can chip them with a back or a tight end, but you can get that edge rusher matched up on the weaker tackle, and there isn't a whole lot. Okay, I'll slide my protection to him. All right, fine. But we've seen it in Pittsburgh with T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith that you can only limit the effectiveness of a really good edge rusher for so long. So I just think that Anderson's skill set will transcend the ability of offenses to nullify him over long periods of time. I just think that he's going to be a fixture as a really high-level player in the league.
All right, so we had Jordan Addison in that list, and so I wanted to shift gears a little bit in our second topic. I wanted to talk and get your opinion on the San Francisco 49ers, and I just can't wrap my head around what they are doing at the wide receiver position. Now, we know that their head coach, Kyle Shanahan, loves his receivers, and he wants them to all be doing very specific things like Deebo Samuel. Their names, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, continue to be tossed around the rumor mill as it pertains to maybe them shipping one of them away. And it makes sense if they did decide to do that, because when you look at how they drafted Ricky Pearsall in the first round, they give Jawan Jennings a big contract, bigger than most people expected. And so you still have Deebo Samuel under contract, I believe, for 2 more years. And Brandon Ayuk's entering the final year of his contract. So a lot of people are assuming Brandon Ayuk is gone. But let's just roll the dice here and say that the 49ers don't move any of these guys. What is the sense that you think, or what's the explanation that you could give of compiling all these receivers this year for this one 2024 season?
They're going for it. They're going for it. They've been close.
But do you need all those receivers to go for it with the team that they have, the roster they have built?
Well, you need 3 for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you've got Ayuk and Samuel and now Pearsall. I mean, Pearsall's a rookie who's probably going to play in the slot a decent amount. Deebo Samuel plays in the slot as well, but he also plays outside, and they shift him and move him constantly. He's a great chess piece for Kyle Shanahan. I think that what they're doing is they're saying, unless we get the king's ransom that we want for Ayuk, we're going to keep him. We're going to take a run at it. We're right on the doorstep of winning a Super Bowl championship. No reason that they can't be there again this coming year. And then a year from now, if they lose Ayuk, they're well positioned to replace him. I don't know if they would consider franchising him. I don't know, the logistics of all that.
Yeah.
But if they wanted to keep him around for another year, but I just think that they see this is their window. This is our window, and we're going to try to run it back as best as possible. And we'll deal with down the road.
If they were to move Ayuk, do you think that their receiving core is still good enough that they could still win this year in this window that you just mentioned?
I suspect if they moved him, they would want a receiver coming back. And it wouldn't have to be a comparable receiver, but it would certainly have to be somebody who can step in the lineup and play. I think if their receiving core is Jennings, Samuel, and Pearsall, that's not good enough because you don't have a true established outside number 2. I don't know who Samuel can play a bunch of different roles. Pearsall's a rookie who's going to play in the slot. Jennings has been like a 3 his whole career. I don't know if that's good enough. I think they'd have to get something back.
When you bring up the franchise tag option, you also have to think that Brock Purdy is going to be getting paid soon.
Yes.
And so with him not on his rookie deal anymore, what's that contract going to look like? There's a lot of people still with the 49ers that are not believers in Brock Purdy. I mean, the guy's done nothing but win, but they all say the same thing. System quarterback. I still need to see him do X, Y, or Z. Are you in that camp, by the way, since we're talking about the 49ers? Because there's 49er fans that are saying this stuff, not national media pundits or people like you and I who are not invested in the 49ers. Do you believe in Brock Purdy? Should he get the next big contract, potentially $60 million a year?
I would take Brock Purdy as the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers right now over Russell Wilson, over Justin Fields right now. I think he's a very, very good quarterback. I think he benefits from being in that system. I think so much of quarterback success is the way in which quarterbacks are trained. Can you train them properly? It starts with some really basic stuff basic in that it seems basic, like your eyes. It starts with your eyes.
Yeah.
Pre-snap, can you recognize coverage? And do you know where to go with the football? And that seems very basic, but it's incredibly complicated. And Brock Purdy has been trained from that perspective really, really well. Like he recognizes coverage and he knows where to go with the ball. And that was the undoing of Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh. That's been the undoing of a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL. And that skill set alone is exceptionally valuable. And then when you throw on top of that he's accurate and he's smart and he's mobile enough, I think he's going to get paid and deservedly so.
And somehow, some way, he fell all the way to Mr. Irrelevant in the 7th round, which makes you wonder, what are the evaluators missing with some of these players as it pertains to even a Tom Brady, a 6th-round draft pick? What did they miss that this guy has that other people don't? Maybe it's some of those intangible things that you talked about.
Well, he doesn't wow you when you look at him,
No.
he doesn't have the biggest arm. He doesn't have, he's not 6'5". He doesn't have this crazy physique. And there's a lot of guys that fall in love with the measurables.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. All right, let's switch gears. Talking about training camp coming up in about a month. A lot of teams have been shifting their focus. Preseason got tacked down, unless you're in the Hall of Fame game, from 4 games to 3. And a lot of teams are saying we're not going to put as much emphasis in the preseason games as much as we are joint practices. It's becoming a very popular thing in the National Football League. Hey, I know I talked to, I think it was David Stefano, and you've had him on your Call Sheet podcast, covers the Minnesota Vikings for us at Fans First Sports Network. And he said how last year they actually, in terms of Kirk Cousins' usage, they used him more in joint settings and less in preseason because they could control the setting. They could control down and distance. Here's what we're working on. Don't touch the quarterback. These joint practices must always end up in a giant fight or skirmish. What's your take on joint training camp practices? Do you think it's a good idea, or is it just an excuse to fight each other? Just fight people that aren't wearing the same uniform as you.
I think it's a great idea. And yes, I also think it's a great excuse to, it's a great idea for a couple of reasons. One, all the things you just said. Coaches love controlled environments. They love to be able to script out what they think is going to happen. If you get into a preseason game and you say, hey, I want our starting offense is going to play 2 series, but then you go 3 and out and you turn the ball over and you wind up, running 5 plays. Now you got a problem because you didn't get to check some of the boxes we didn't get to run any short yardage stuff. We didn't get to run a concept that we wanted to see live. You can do all that stuff in a controlled practice. And when you're up against your own guys for so long in training camp and you're just banging against your own guys, players are desperate to get up against somebody else. And sometimes they don't even care if it means anything, if the scoreboard's on or not. It's just another colored jersey. And I think that's valuable in and of itself for the competition aspect. If you're a head coach and you've got a good relationship with another head coach and you trust that they're going to do things the right way, I think it's great. I've done it as a high school coach. We've had quote unquote joint practices. Now it doesn't quite work exactly, obviously, like it does in the NFL, but we've been in controlled environments with other programs who we feel comfortable with and know that they're not going to try to fight us. They're not going to take cheap shots. They're not going to try to win the practice. It's going to be, beneficial to both groups. So I love it.
Well, what would you say to a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers who doesn't do it anymore? They used to do it. They had joint practices leading up to preseason games against the Buffalo Bills. This was way back in the 2016, 2017 seasons. They had one against the Detroit Lions, I recall. They both did have skirmishes in those joint practices, but since then they've never done it. What would you say about that in terms of a coach like Mike Tomlin, who's very calculated? He knows what he's doing. I'm sure they could set something up with the proximity to certain teams, and he chooses not to. Is he missing an opportunity?
I'm sure he's got his reasons. Maybe he doesn't want anything that the Steelers are doing to get out because, well, obviously when you go up against another team, there's the opportunity for things you're working on to leak. Maybe you don't trust people here. Maybe it's a logistical thing. I mean, you think about the teams that are closest to Pittsburgh. It's Baltimore, it's Cincinnati, it's Cleveland. I mean, maybe they're not working something out with the Eagles. Maybe the Eagles aren't interested in something like that. Trying to find a partner in that sense in the NFL could probably be tricky. So I get why teams would not want to do it. But for those who are able to, I think it's very beneficial.
Yeah, I think it's great. And as a coach, even though I didn't coach football, I agree with you. When you can set up situations and, in lacrosse, lacrosse. I mean, when you're talking about man up, man down, you want to work on certain things. You can set it up in a scrimmage setting where like, look, my man up versus your man down. And then we actually had on the other side of the field, the opposite. So it's really great to just work on the specifics. We'll see how that pans out. And if any other fights escalate this year, but let's go to, this is really interesting. And I want to get your take before we talk about Tom Brady. And he is getting ready and he's getting geared up, and Fox is putting him out there in front of as many cameras as possible because they want him to be the face of Fox Sports. And he's going to be the #1 color commentator for Fox Sports in 2024 and beyond. The dude signed like a $10 million a year deal for 10 years or something like that to do these games. And most recently was an interview that he did on the Colin Cowherd show. Have you seen the clip on social media where he's talking about his responsibility as a quarterback pre-snap? Have you seen that, Coach?
Yes.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So it is good. It gives you a taste. I want to just ask you point blank. Do you think Tom Brady's going to be good? And do you think he's going to supplant Tony Romo as like the next great thing in terms of color commentary?
If he wants to be good at it, which I'm sure he does, he'll probably be good at it. Yeah. I mean, Tom Brady's work ethic is legendary. His determination is legendary. I think that his knowledge as both a quarterback and a product of Bill Belichick's system for so long, has probably taught him about as much as you can learn about the game. Oftentimes they say that offensive linemen know the game better than anybody else because of all the adjustments that they have to make and their ability. They got to know run, pass, all of it. But I don't know too many people who probably see and understand the game better than Brady. When he was talking in that clip about protections, and I think that that's a thing that most people overlook because you think about the passing game and immediately everybody starts going, well, routes and everybody loves to draw stuff up on a whiteboard. But the protection stuff is the nuts and bolts of it all. And that told me right away that like he's going to be heavy on the details. Now, here will be an interesting thing. Will he be heavy on the details in a way that is beneficial and accessible? Or will it be so football nerdy that it won't translate to the average viewer? Because that's one thing Tony Romo did really well. Tony Romo was really good at giving you really solid X and O's, but in a way that translated so that an average fan could understand it. That'll be, I think, Brady's challenge. I don't want to say dumbing it down, but making it accessible.
If I were to give Tom Brady any advice, because Tony Romo's shtick has certainly soured with a lot of people, myself included. The first year Tony Romo was a color commentator, he was basically predicting what was going to happen. Oh, he's checking out of it, Jim. He's checking out of it. Here we go. He's going to be looking to the right. Look for this hot route. He's going to throw it down to whatever receiver they're watching, whatever. And it would happen. And people are like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like Tony Romo is showing us exactly what's happening and what's going to happen. If I'm giving advice to Tom Brady, I'm like, Tom, I want you to be reactionary. I don't want you to try and predict what's going to happen. Instead, tell me why what happened. So if there was a busted play at the line of scrimmage, and let's say it's the Pittsburgh Steelers game and Russell Wilson, Tom Brady could say, the reason that play didn't work is Russell Wilson's got to identify that scheme that the defense is running. He has to see that blitzer coming, and he's got to check out of that. He's got to slide this protection over. That's the stuff that's going to make him great. And so I don't think that if he focused on it that way, I don't think that it would be a shtick. Like Tony Romo has a shtick, in my opinion, and that's getting old for a lot of people. But I think that Tom Brady, if he were smart, and he is a very intelligent guy, he'll be able to make his own, blaze his own trail. But I will say this too, Greg Olson, he's taking over that number one spot with Fox, was also very, very good. And he did more of the reactionary stuff as well. So do you like Tony Romo? I should ask you that as well, because I can't stand Romo anymore. I think he talks way too much.
I'll be honest. I watch a lot of games with the sound off. I mute a lot of games. I really do. I didn't dislike Tony Romo. I got frustrated, and I think this was part of his, I don't want to say downfall. That's a bit dramatic, but his unwillingness to criticize other NFL players, even if that criticism was constructive, began to become a problem. Like he was so I don't want to say maybe he was too tight with them, too buddy with them, didn't want to be the bad guy. But there were clear examples where he needed to be more critical.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't do it. I don't think Tom Brady's going to have that problem. I think Tom Brady is going to be able to call it like it is and have no issues with it whatsoever.
It'll be interesting. I'm sure that there'll be some really good stuff. And every year when you have new faces, new voices on the call, whether you're talking about play-by-play or whether color commentary, it takes some time. So there'll probably be some bumps in the road. He'll probably say something stupid and it'll make its way around social media. I'll laugh at it, but he'll end up being pretty good, I think. All right, let's talk about the last topic before we go to our player profile. The NFL loves to intervene with certain things. They want things to be a certain way. And if it's not that way, they're going to put parameters around it to make it that way. And now they're even going into awards. So I don't know if you saw this, but last year, the comeback player of the year was not DeMar Hamlin, who essentially died on the football field, came back, made the Buffalo Bills roster. He was inactive a bunch and bounced back and forth between active and inactive and wasn't really a big time player, but the dude basically died on the field and came back to continue to play football. And they voted Joe Flacco because Joe Flacco sucked the year before, and he comes back in midseason and gets the Browns into the playoffs. We're not going to talk about what happened in the playoffs, but still, they decided to come out and put some parameters around the award saying like, well, we're trying to focus on this, this, and this. What are your thoughts on the NFL trying to put up parameters for an award that is voted on by people in terms of how you can and cannot view the award? Is it NFL overreach, or is this essentially just, well, that's what the NFL does?
Yeah, I think with this particular award, the NFL is really trying to put their thumb on the scale and say, like, we want it to be here's the type of award. We want it to be a feel-good award.
Yeah.
The Damar Hamlin thing is a feel-good story. But if you're evaluating comeback player of the year based upon your actual play, he's not the winner. And that's
Right.
that may sound harsh, but it's just true. His on-field contributions palled in comparison to some other guys who had been, not very successful the year before, like Flacco, and then really, really turned it around. He's a great story, one of the greatest stories in recent modern football. But I think with the NFL is saying, like, yeah, we want the feel-good story as the comeback player of the year, as opposed to grumpy Joe Flacco, he plays really, really well for a while, but nobody's going to celebrate Joe Flacco winning comeback player of the year. They would have celebrated Damar Hamlin. So I think, yes, this is the NFL really trying to guide the process.
I read that. I'm like, this is voted on. If you don't want certain stories, then don't leave it up to voters. Just pick it.
Yeah.
Just have a board that picks the one you want. So don't leave it up to voters. But if you're going to leave it up to voters, then you got to let the process be the process, and they vote on who they deem is the best person for it. I think we would all say that everyone expected it to be Damar Hamlin last year, and yet it was Joe Flacco. Of all freaking people, Joe Flacco, Mr. Unibrow, comes back from the dead and chokes away a chance for the Browns because he threw a bunch of pick sixes in the playoffs. But I digress. I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked at all by this. The NFL, they want their product to be a certain way. And if they don't get it, they're going to force it to be the way that they want it. And I think this is just another example. All right, let's finish things up. This is actually kind of sad and kind of scary. I was scrolling through Twitter/X, whatever we're calling it this week, and I saw that Barry Sanders told some people that over Father's Day weekend, he had a quote unquote heart-related scare. And that's frightening. And this comes off the heels of, I saw a video on Twitter. I shared this. I quote tweeted it and said that it was a video of Jerome Bettis when he was, I think it was back in 96 with the Steelers. They still had the block uniforms. It was at Three River Stadium and he was running all over the Bills. And I quote tweeted and said, young Steeler fans seeing this, do yourself a favor and go back and watch some highlights of young Jerome Bettis. Because if the only memory you have of the bus is him winning Super Bowl 40 when he was essentially a shell of himself and nothing more than a goal line back, you're not getting how good this guy actually was in his prime. And so I saw this about Barry Sanders. It's like young football fans, because he didn't play long in the league. Do yourself a service. Go back and watch Barry Sanders highlights. He was a video game in real person. The things that he did, you looked at and said, that's not real. Like, is this some type of CGI going on right now? There's no way he would make 4 defenders miss and then break off an 85-yard run for a touchdown. Barry Sanders was amazing, and I'm glad that he's okay, and I hope that he is healthy for a really long time. But I just wanted to say this is like a Barry Sanders appreciation moment of the podcast. So, Coach, what are your memories of number 20 from Detroit?
Barry Sanders being able to cut at full speed. I've never seen anybody do that before. Like, most people have to slow down in some way, shape, or form. Their knees and ankles can't withstand the change of direction at full speed. He could cut at full speed. I've never seen a running back make some of the most talented athletes in the world look foolish the way that Barry Sanders did. You're getting guys like Ronnie Lott flying downhill and just grabbing air. So some of the older, my grandfather, who was I said Joe Flacco was grumpy. My grandfather was a grumpy man from the Greatest Generation, right? Yeah. And I remember watching a Thanksgiving Day game one time with my grandfather there, and Barry Sanders was doing Barry Sanders stuff because the Lions always play on Thanksgiving. And I remember remarking, like, man, there's never been a running back like this in NFL history. And my grandfather was like, yes, there has. His name was Gale Sayers. He was like, he was adamant that Barry Sanders was little more than a modern Gale Sayers. But since Barry Sanders, there's been nobody else who resembles what he does, or did, I should say. And then like Gale Sayers, he walked away early. I remember when he retired, everybody was like, what? How is Barry Sanders walking away from the game right now. And he never came. You just kept waiting for the announcement that, oh, Barry's coming back. Barry's coming back. Never happened. Fascinating decision.
It was in 95, and you talked about some of the best defenders that he juked out of their shoes. He tore Rod Woodson's ACL.
Yeah.
If you go back and look, I believe it was a week 1 game, and that was the Steeler fans know it well. Bill Cowher saved a roster spot for Rod Woodson, and he came back from an ACL tear and played in the Super Bowl, a Super Bowl 30 against Dallas. But Barry Sanders was amazing. And he was, if you watch the games, it would be Barry Sanders' loss of 1, Barry Sanders' loss of 3. The Lions sucked. Yeah. And then Barry Sanders breaks off a 95-yard run for a touchdown. And I remember the times that they played the Steelers, you're like, okay, they got to keep Barry Sanders in check. Like, that's number 1, like key number 1. And you're like, okay, they've got him bottled up. And he would have 15 yards rushing in the first half. And then he would explode in the second half for 130. And you're like, gosh, darn it, what the hell happened? That was Barry Sanders. So if you're a young person listening to this and you've never gone back and appreciated Barry Sanders, do so. Do it today. Go to YouTube, type in Barry Sanders highlights, and you will be absolutely stunned at some of the stuff. And you might see some things in like the Madden video game and say, that's not realistic. Watch Barry Sanders highlights, and you will say, holy hell, a human being actually did this stuff. It is realistic. So
the Lions beat the Steelers on a Thanksgiving day one year, 45-3. And I'm with my whole family. Everybody's there. I'm the only Steeler fan in the room. And they're just getting annihilated. And Barry Sanders does some Barry Sanders thing. And my uncle's like, you might want to tackle the Sanders guy. And I just lost it. I was like, shut up. Everybody shut up. Leave me alone. I stormed out of the room. It's an exit, man.
That's fantastic. That is great. So Barry Sanders, it's just an appreciation moment because of that health-related scare, and hope he's okay. And I hope he lives a lot longer. Hall of Famer, seems like a really great dude. And so there you go. Coach, I want to give you an opportunity to plug the call sheet this week. What's coming up?
Yeah, so actually this week we're going to get to the topic I thought we were going to do last week, but last week on the show I talked about wanting to get into a conversation about modern defenses, sub packages, and why they play. Why don't teams really play a base defense anymore? What's it mean to play a sub package defense, and how do you employ those things? I actually got into a conversation last week about ranking the divisions by their quality of their head coaches. So I'm going to come back to that defensive conversation this week.
Should be good. And the Gridiron glossaries are doing great. If you don't follow Coach at Coach's Call Sheet, do so. You'll see him breaking down just one term. And I really think they're fantastic. And I share them every time I see them on my Twitter feed. You can follow me at jhartman, HARTMAN_PIT. But Coach, keep up the good work, man. It's been good. Have you enjoyed those Gridiron glossaries?
Yeah, it's fun. It's kind of boundless. Yesterday's was access throw. We were talking, well, what's an access throw? That's a term. I'll bet Tom Brady will use that term. You don't hear that term a lot, but he'll probably drop a term like that. So we're just trying to find some terms. Some of them are really common and some of them not so much, but maybe help people raise their football IQ a little bit.
Absolutely. All right, Coach, been a great show. Next week, we'll have to dig in deeper to try and find something to talk about in the dead weeks, but nonetheless, we'll do it. We'll see you next week on another NFL Whip Round. Take it easy, everyone.